All right. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I know there are 62 participants on this webinar. I can't see all of you, but I'm so grateful you're here. That was My Way's Cloudy by Jake Blount and Molly Obomsawin, and a video shot and directed by Lakota Sanborn with Selena Neptune, dancing, filmed at Penobscot Nation. Sharing this piece is almost in a way a callback to our previous and the first Learning from Land Return webinar we've done together. That was last spring in May, and it featured Molly and Lakota, as well as Isaac St. John and Pollard Renko, Ethan Miller, and Brett Ciccatelli in a conversation about land return to Wabanaki NGOs and nations. Audience out there, thank you for tuning in and spending some time this afternoon hearing more about land returns that have happened since that first Learning from Land Return last spring, celebrating the return of Medicine Wheel to the Mi'kmaq Nation, and walking with us as we continue to uncover learnings about this work. I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to introduce themselves, but before I say that, I want to mention that we are recording this session so that we can share it with those who can't make it right now. And while I have some prepared questions for the panel, definitely use the Q&A, the chat, or the Q&A box at the bottom to share any questions that are coming up for you. And we'll have some time later on for the panelists to respond to those. Okay, so beautiful, lovely panel. Thank you so much for being here. Please take just a minute to introduce yourself and maybe describe briefly your role in relation to the return of Medicine Wheel. And Shannon, are you ready and willing to break the ice and then pass it on to another panelist?
Certainly, certainly. Thank you very much. So my name is Shannon Hill. I'm the Environmental Health Director for the Mi'kmaq Nation. Um, I started in this position 2 years ago. Shortly after I started the position, I was fortunate to be appointed to the Wabanaki Land Commission with my Vice Chief Richard Sillaboy, who was not able to join us here today. He's a very busy guy. Um, and so then that started my work with the Wabanaki Land Commission. And this project in particular was one that I know we really talked about first thing, and it was really hit or miss. And I remember from being on council the 2 years prior that Richard had brought this land forward um, as a possible acquisition as well, even back then. So I know that this has been at least 4 or 5 years in the making.
Thanks, Shannon. I'm excited we'll get to hear more about that whole process all those years. Um, how about Brett?
Hey, thanks for being here, everybody. I'm Brett Ciccatelli. I work with Ellie at First Light. I'm one of the core staff. I focus on land return work, and came into this role with this project with Medicine Wheel kind of already on the tracks in a different iteration of its process as a tribal land recovery manager. This sort of really specific position um, that First Light created with the help of the Wabanaki Commission and support from the Nature Conservancy and Maine Coast Heritage Trust, and then through that role, I've evolved in this more with the rest of the team at First Light, kind of specializing in core pieces of our work. So I was able to be really close to this project for the whole time I've been on board with First Light, so a little over 2 years. Maybe I'll pass to Sayona. So Sayona actually acts in that both in the beginning and still as a mentor and sort of thought partner in land return work. So
Thanks, Brett. Hi, everyone. Sayona Ulbrich. Glad to be with you all. Thanks for showing up. I am with Maine Coast Heritage Trust, and I am part of the Conservation Community Delegation in First Light, and was one of the sort of project partner people here through its many threads, which we'll hear about later today. So look forward to speaking more.
Thanks, Iona. Gabriella, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Gabriela Alcalde. I'm with the Soul Foundation, and we've been fortunate to be a partner in this process, but really certainly working in the background. Just really honored to be here. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Frances, please introduce yourself to the crowd.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Frances Octoma. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe at Madaukmeguk. I currently serve as the Collaborative Fund Manager at the Wabanaki Commission on Land and Stewardship. In this role, I manage the Walunkee Yudamene Gizi Abaji Fund, which is translated from Passamaquoddy to let us take good care of what has returned. This fund, which some of you may know as the Solidarity Deposit for the Wabanaki Self-Determination Fund, is really a companion to the land return and land access work that we're doing at First Light and the Wabanaki Commission. Our goal for this fund is to repair, rebuild, and sustain Wabanaki relationship, kinship, and access to place by directly helping Wabanaki people and institutions fulfill their caretaking responsibilities of lands and waters across Wabanaki traditional territory. And so we provide unrestricted grants to Wabanaki tribal governments, NGOs, and individuals, and just opened our very first application period this January. Our deadline closes on March 14th, so next week, next Friday. And we're excited to be funding work by Wabanaki people in relationship to our cultures and our homelands this spring.
Amazing. Thank you, Frances. And yeah, thank you all for being here and sharing your various perspectives on how this particular land return has come about, what there is to learn from it. We want to start pretty big picture. So, Brett and Frances, given your roles with First Light and the Wabanaki Commission, respectively, can you help us understand the broader context for this land return and how it relates to the other work around return that First Light and the Commission are taking on?
I could start in there, Francis, and talk about tributary a little bit, or if you had some, yeah. So Francis touched a little bit on the relation to the commission and the fund, Wonky Kamene, and where this land return is fitting into the context right now of really just land return projects, so actual transfers of and acquisitions of new land for Wabanaki governments, primarily with support from the First Light community, is in this what we call this tributary land return group. So it's a set of projects right now that number about 11, the number 11. It's about 51,000 acres, made up of project team leads from across organizations within First Light. People that are on this call might be part of those teams. They're individual projects, but they're happening at the same time in the same space. And there's a lot of new creative collaborative work happening to look at how to fundraise for concurrent projects. Because one thing Ellie mentioned a year ago, it was late April, actually, so less than a year ago, we talked about this return to Bomazene Land Trust from Land in Common. And there's been other land returns that have been happening, right? This isn't a brand new thing that's taking off today, but they've sort of dropped out in drips and drabs. And part of the focused attention of this community and the commission and their capacity, their interest has created sort of a big push where there's a lot more. I mean, there at once it went from being a land return here or there that the First Light community might be trying to figure out how to support in its partnership with tribal nations and organizations to really looking at a big spread. And I'll share screen for just a second, and then there'll be a link to this page that people can take away and spend more time on, but it'll help us zoom in on Medicine Wheel specifically. But of these projects, they're ongoing. The deeds have been registered to Wabanaki Nation. So 3 of those 11 are kind of already moved on to a different phase. They're into the return phase and the new space for connection and care. Others are coming soon. Some we know exactly how they're going to come together and how we're going to pay for them, and some we have no idea. And there's a big need that the community is undertaking to figure out how to do it, how to pull these all off. So, and the commission has been the guiding partner in all this, is helping us put these projects in a space that's prioritized. Which before I share that map, Francis, did you want to say anything about the commission's the makeup and the role of it, and anything extra than what you already said, or?
No, well, maybe. I like listening to you talk, Brett, because I hear strategy when you speak. Um, and so I think just what I want to center, as an employee of the commission, is that when we're talking about land return, we're talking about healing in a lot of really different ways. I think as a Wabanaki person about the relationships that we have, not just to things that grow physically on the land, like the medicines, the trees, the things that we use to harvest to make baskets, um, but also the way that that connects to our caretaking of the water. If you have healthy lands, you have healthy waters, and vice versa. Um, and so when you're talking about land return, you're talking about something much bigger than this physical thing, this tangible thing that we can all know and understand. You're really talking about how we as Wabanaki people are fulfilling our responsibilities and our relationships to relatives all over, whether that's to fish, to waters, to trees, to each other, human, non-human. Um, we really want to make sure that we're leading those efforts so that the care of all of those who are responsible for um, are being tended to.
Thanks, Francis. So I'll throw up this website and zoom in to maybe hand off to Shannon. So it'll be will maybe bring us to a place with this map. And Francis's point to going about water, I think it was an accident, maybe not, but the name even tributary, that's sort of a, the idea that these projects are flowing concurrently, but make something bigger. But also most of them are near water. I mean, it's just a lot of the projects that have come as priorities from the commission or as projects of the moment to focus on end up being near water. So you can see this sort of map of the state showing where things are. These purple ones here, and then as we zoom in up here are have already the deeds have transferred to the tribal governments in those cases. So we'll zoom in, just click on this guy, and this is the project today we'll talk about. So this is Medicine Wheel, and the way this map is set up, you'll see it's pretty general, speaking to what the commission has affirmed as the role or the tribal partner, the roles of these projects. We're not doing a whole lot. They're not deep dives into each project, but they're meant to sort of guide and give some context. So that's that. I'm gonna share a different thing when for Shannon as she takes off, showing the property in more detail. So
Yeah, thank you, Brett and Francis, for that kind of bigger context. And Shannon, I think, yeah, this is the chance to offer a much deeper dive. What introduce us to Medicine Wheel? What is this place and why is it important?
So, what we have called Medicine Wheel is a section of land located in Littleton, what's on called the West Ridge Road. So it's off Route 1. It's in a really beautiful spot there in Littleton, actually. It sits pretty high up in elevation, and when you're standing there, you can literally do just about a 360 all the way around and see for miles and miles. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot. And we acquired that property probably about 25 years ago now. And you can kind of see the houses. We have a residential area out there. We have a very strong population of Mi'kmaq in the Littleton, Holton area. So this was done in order to support um, their um, wanting to stay in the area where they've grown up. We have housing in different areas of Aroostook County. So this is our Littleton property, which we have dubbed Medicine Wheel. Um, the plan eventually would be to finish that residential area, and the road actually goes around in a circle to mimic a medicine wheel, hence the name. Probably about 4 years ago now, 4 or 3, we were able to purchase the land across the street. It was an existing Christmas tree farm, and it was something that we were interested in also having, and we were able to purchase that. And that was also with the help from First Light. That was before my time. But now this new property. So What's great about this is once again, we were able to get land that already abuts existing land. Anytime that we as a nation can enlarge, an existing area that we already have, just makes it so much more, valuable to us. It gives us area to put in our own roads and community needs. So this was really exciting because of the fact it was abutting a current property. The other really exciting part about this one too that sometimes gets underestimated was the old property, the Medicine Wheel property. We also purchased from the same landowner, and she had an existing right of way going through our property in order for her to access Long Lake, as you see there. So with this purchase, we also bought back that right of way. So nobody else has any more claim to be able to put a road in to access the back of that lake. We own the whole west side of that now. So that's pretty exciting. As Brent had mentioned, a lot of the projects do tend to pop up around water. Um, I feel like we do that kind of unconsciously on purpose, but water is life. Everything starts with water, and water is just so important to our culture for so many different reasons. This is really the first purchase, um, besides, the original Medicine Wheel purchase, where we actually own rights, full rights to access this piece of water now for recreation, for fishing, it gives our Boys and Girls Club, we have a rack of canoes that sit out there by the office, and they rarely get to get used. And now they'll finally have a place to take those canoes and the kids and go out and not have to worry about infringing on anybody else's property because it's all us. So that's great. In the future, that's something we're definitely hoping to encourage is access down to that lake and utilize that for the community to get to, for the youth to access, and so many other things. So property comes with it's mostly forested, and for the most part, the southern part is pretty wet. There's some nice trees to the north, and then to the northeast, how it doglegs over. There's about 26 acres, I believe, of current agricultural land. So that was kind of an added bonus. It's just the way this property was cut out, and but that fits so well within our mission as well because we will either utilize that existing ag with our farming operations that we currently have, or utilize that as part of our Christmas tree farm. So, um, really excited about that. The other thing, and I mentioned that it was wet there, that southern end of that property. We look at land, I think, a lot different than a lot of other people do. A lot of people would shy away from buying something with a wetland. Um, you know, Again, the water is life, and wetlands provide so many things that traditionally we use and want to continue to be able to harvest. So, all of our medicines, pretty much almost all of them, you'll find in wetlands. So that's really important to us as well. And then what's super exciting is now with that right away gone, and the addition of this property. So the very southern border of this property, where it abuts our current piece, is right where we've located a sugar bush. So we're super excited to start a maple syruping operation, hopefully as soon as next March. I want to be tapping next March. That's the goal.
Shannon, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I love what doesn't come through so much in the map is the sense of topography. I know it's supposed to, but hearing that you can stand there and turn and see so far in every direction and hearing some of the visions you hope for this land. And we'll get a chance to talk more about that later too. I do want to turn to the side of this that will be maybe familiar to lots of people in the audience. That is really around the land transaction that had to happen in order for the land to return to Mi'kmaq Nation. So, Siona, I'm wondering if you can walk us through your experience of this land return and really from the point of view of a conservation organization. How did this go?
Sure, I can. Although part of this is Brett's story, so I'm going to let you take part of that, Brett, because you were key. But um, in some ways, this is one of those examples of where the skill sets and sort of what land conservation groups are used to doing are a fit in helping make these projects happen. Um, to stick to transactional, essentially we had to negotiate a purchase option agreement. So the right to purchase, not an obligation, as in a contract, and then figure out how to pull things together and work through process. And what I want to underscore here is this was early on. So, you know, I knew how to work with a landowner and figure out an option agreement and negotiate the terms of that. But I think Richard and staff at the Nation didn't quite know who we were. And there were still a lot of questions of who did what step in the process. And this was such a learning experience on all sides in order to start to figure out what questions we needed to ask and how to answer them, which makes it great to be talking about today. So there was a lot of talking with the landowner. I think a lot of us work with landowners that have a lot of questions, don't know conservation, are set on price ideas, have concepts of how much money there is out there to buy land. All of those were talking points that were important. And though we had a landowner who cares and who wanted to see if we could craft this opportunity. This is a landowner who knew one of the council members as a young person and cared a lot about the nation as well, which was pretty interesting background. So there was negotiation of a purchase option agreement, figuring out which attorney to involve in a transaction like this. We didn't yet know. Now it's a little more clear. Figuring out for First Light whether First Light was ready to step up and hold a transferable purchase option agreement and understanding what that meant. Seeing what steps were needed to do that was a question. And a question, a number of questions for the tribal council and then eventually for the commission on what First Light would and could do and whether we could find the funds and how this would work. So there were so many questions that were helpful to need to ask as we went through this. Which due diligence steps do we need to take when? So one of the key learnings I think that Brett and I both had through this was do some of the due diligence in order to be clear on what the real opportunity is when you're then talking to the tribal nation. That feels important. So Shannon touched on the right of way. There were also some complexities in title, and that's something that we all know happens often. Getting a level of clarity on that so that tribal council can be informed in making choices and in making decisions felt really important to take on pretty early in the transaction. I'll also name that a purchase option agreement is a great fit as a tool. You often can't get them, but having the possibility without an obligation to take on a real estate interest is a helpful way to go. So I took on carrying these early negotiations with the landowner because Brett's job didn't exist yet. And this needed to begin when the relationship was ready for these conversations. So I took it on early and then worked with Brett to transition it over. And Brett, I'm gonna turn it over really to you because you carried it through the important part.
Thanks, Leona. That's helpful. I mean, it's good to rehear that background too, because some of it is before I was there. But I think the point about the seller wanting it to happen is also really important. That's true of those projects that I meant to put that link up. Put the link up. You got to have a willing seller, right? And I feel like it feels more, um, it feels really good when there is that willing seller. And this person was there. The Where we sort of went through mother when I came in, some project challenges or ups and downs was figuring out those valuation questions. The original option Sayona had worked on actually expired and we weren't there. We couldn't do this project. And Shannon and I had started talking about a different piece of land that could meet some of the same needs that ultimately this property might meet around the sugary. And we started to put together that similar model of like a piecemeal around a project. How would we fund a project? And then that one fell apart. And that was again, a seller that seemed friendly, but also hadn't really worked with a conservation type of transaction before. There aren't a lot of groups like MCHT or TNC doing work up in the sort of valley of the Route 1 corridor in the county. So that fell apart, and then we were able to get this revisit, this second chance with the seller. Um, and really, the missing piece was figuring out how to bring all the sort of financial pieces together at the right time. And MCHD made a partner contribution into that First Light. So our team was able to fundraise from some donors who were really interested in this type of project. The Maine Farmland Trust was able to put small contributions in. Part of why I get Gabriella and really wanted you part of this conversation is the Sewell Foundation was able to look at funding that was available for that other project that didn't come through and really help fill the sort of final goal of, gap that we had. But we also had the nation, their forester, helping with the mapping of the property and understanding of the parcel. The Nature Conservancy helped with mapping and helped with brainstorming and thinking around how we could bring this thing together. It was a big kind of lots of people looking over the same piece of paper trying to figure out how we could do it. And it aligned. And it was, of those projects that we're driving through, it was the first one to close of that set, which felt really good too. Really, really special to have it be early on. So yeah, that's a little more detail on the transaction. I don't want to spend much more time on that. We can have questions later, but it really was a big lift by lots of folks. But Sayona outlined a lot of the pieces that really helped kind of where the matching had to happen. So
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And just a reminder, absolutely put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll have time for some of those at the end. Shannon, I want to turn to you. There, as you mentioned, there have been collaborations with First Light and different non-native organizations before, like around the tree farm. This is the first return with this community of organizations that's returning land that's fully funded, so at no cost to the Mi'kmaq Nation, and with no restriction around how the land is used for Mi'kmaq Nation. So, what are the factors that you see in all of this, in the many partners working on the non-native side, in the communication with Tribal Council, and the relationship with the Wabanaki Commission? In all of that, what are the factors that allowed this land return to succeed?
Oh, well, like everyone's mentioned, there was a lot of moving parts in this, but a lot of partners and just a lot of like-minded people that had the same mission. And I think that is the hugest contributor to this finally, becoming a reality was, literally like, Brett laid out all the different funders and everybody that had, a hand in this. And um, honestly, it may not have happened without all those people contributing in one way, shape, or form. So I think the hugest, factor was, all that collaboration between the funders and First Light and natives and non-natives. It was, truly a beautiful thing.
Thanks, Shannon. We want to turn more into kind of what are the things that we've learned from this return and how do we carry them forward into future projects? And Gabriella, I'd like to start with you. We've heard just a little bit from Brett around the role of Sewell's funding in this project. And yeah, could you speak about that process and what you're carrying forward?
Yeah, I'll actually start with sort of what we've learned. We had observed a number of our team have been getting more inquiries and just been part of more conversations around land return. So we took that opportunity to pause and ask ourselves, what is our process? What is our approach? Are we being transparent about it? Are we being thoughtful about it? Is it aligned with our values? So we did actually generate some ideas and shared them with a number of our partners, um, both within the Wabanaki program area that we have and also our food systems, because we were thinking about both land return and land access. So where we've landed is, and sort of the lesson for us is that we will we want to be part of efforts where the project is moving decision making closer to the community, where the aim includes wanting to repair historical inequities, where it is contributing to one of the long-term impacts that we have identified for ourselves at the School Foundation, which is to make sure that efforts that are led by Black, Indigenous, people of color, rural Mainers, and women are well resourced to advance their mission. So when we look at land return, we are particularly looking at who is involved in it, who is determining, who is benefiting, who is making the decisions. So in this particular case, I had actually been in conversation with Shannon, and Brett had been involved in the conversations as well about some funding from the Soul Foundation for a specific plot of land. And as we got really close to the grant actually being decided upon, Shannon came back and said, actually, that piece of land didn't work out. But in conversation, we were aware that obviously with land, it's not something you can wait until the next grant cycle. So we discussed the fact that, this was going to be an ongoing search for the right piece of land. So we were able to just issue the grant and write it out in a general way so that it could be utilized once the land was found. So that was a very easy thing for a funder to do, but it sort of sequenced things correctly so that we weren't holding up a really, as we've heard, process that entails lots of people, lots of collaboration, lots of time-sensitive decisions and actions. But rather, we were able to be part of that conversation where we understood the purpose and the goal, and that we were able to put in resources into that, and sort of just have it be patient funding, but it wasn't tied to a specific, I believe we even did like a 2-year grant just to not put pressure on that. And I would just say that that's a very easy thing for a funder to do. And as a funder that's committed to trust-based philanthropy, we really believe that through our practices, we can show our trust in our partners and that they know best what they're doing and they know best how to use their resources appropriately. So we really try to, as much as possible, do unrestricted general operating and, when necessary, multi-year funding. Obviously, with something like this, it's not as necessary to do multi-year, but I would just urge for any funders on the call that these are simple changes that we can make. They are all IRS okay. And it just builds that relationship. It allowed us to learn so much more than we would have learned otherwise if we had just said, here's this narrow window, a narrow way in which we can partner. Instead, we had many conversations, and I think any of the efforts that we've been involved with around land return, they have been very long conversations. So it's not a transactional thing. It is a very much relationship building where we are learning a lot, and we are now trying to consistently apply our land return approach of is this being decided upon by the community, in this case, Wabanaki community? And are we really thinking about the impact of the process as well?
Well, thank you for that. I think even like the creation of kind of a set of principles or values, even that I think reflects how much this work is growing and changing, and having time to pause and say, what are our values in this space, and feeling certain enough that the work of land return will continue to make it worth it to spend some time laying those out. Um, Thanks also for referencing the IRS, because I think one of the questions that comes up a lot in this work is around, the legality. What are we allowed to do as conservation organizations, as 501(c)(3)s? Are we really allowed to actually legally return land? And does it align with our mission to spend the staff time and resources in pursuit of land return, when it's not about acquiring land for our organization? Um, so Sayona, I'm hoping I can turn to you for, again, the kind of conservation organization approach to these sorts of questions. What does it take to navigate that in your conservation organization, to stick with it for several years, to support the time and staff resources needed to support this work?
Yeah. Um, I can give a shot at it. I'm reflecting, thanks to Gabriella's point on um, a common challenge for us in the land trust world and funder world maybe too, is how transactional our thinking and our measures are. And I have appreciated being challenged about that, thinking back to Francis's words and Shannon's words that describe, reconnection everywhere. I think Francis said, it's such a good reminder that there's so many places that can offer those medicines, or that can have the values that are a good fit, and not necessarily only one distinct tax parcel, which is sort of how we've all gotten used to thinking. And our systems are set up to think in that way. And I think it's good for us to ask questions about that, just in the way that Gabriella was just reflecting on as a funder. So to your question, Maine Coast Heritage Trust is fortunate to have a general counsel on staff. So we have a lawyer we can ask questions of as we go. A lot of land trusts do not have that, but we do. And we have Karen Marchetti, who's our general counsel, has been able to really put some time into digging into our articles of incorporation. Some land trusts would look instead to their bylaws and take a look at, is land return doable by our organization without restrictions? Her finding is, for Maine Coast Heritage Trust, yes. It's pretty clear and simple. So that doesn't mean that everyone's all clear on that and comfortable with that. I don't want to act like that's an easy done and figured out. But from a legal standpoint, yes, we can do that. And in fact, our organization has a long history of working with other governments and agencies to transfer land without restrictions. And that's been helpful to us in the considerations and the conversations. We work with the state government and with federal government to transfer lands, often without restrictions, because we're transferring them to natural resource agencies, for instance. And that's been helpful for us to think about. So we're fortunate to have an attorney on staff who could help guide us and give us that clarity. As I said, it doesn't make these conversations easy or always comfortable. So I don't want to pretend that that is the case. Thinking about how we thought about this, and how you sort of navigate through these conversations and projects. Thinking about community conservation values, which is a comfortable topic and lens for many land trusts now, and hearing community needs Many land trusts work with groups focused on housing or groups focused on water access as listening to community needs. That's something a lot of land trusts have grown more comfortable with. It's good to think in terms of similar lenses of community needs, which land return hears. These projects, land return projects, do challenge our systems, our criteria, our consideration processes, and that's not a bad thing. But I just want to be clear with people that it is good to keep finding better ways to talk and think about this work, I think. Having examples come through. Brett pointed to 3, and there have been a couple others out there around Maine and around the country. And seeing land return take place, often helped by land trusts and other organizations and funders, is so helpful because you're not alone. And I think feeling not alone is really important to all of us. Having resources to turn to, like Rob Levin's frequently asked question document, which is on the Dawn Land Return website as a resource, are really helpful when you're trying to navigate those questions, like what Ellie raised about IRS considerations or legal considerations. There are resources out there. I also want to raise up the Nature Conservancy of Maine's policy statement on working with Indigenous people. A fantastic resource for people to turn to. I use it often in conversations with our board and staff. I'm going to mention a few learnings that I've had in trying to work our organization through these projects with board and staff. I found it so important to avoid or to help offset internal discomfort. Use a lens that feels comfortable in describing projects. And what I do with every memo to our board is remind them of who Wabanaki people are, what each nation is called, where they are, so that people start to, our exposure is pretty minimal, unfortunately, to that, and getting everyone a little more comfortable and feeling used to seeing that can be really helpful in moving things forward, not making assumptions about understanding or knowledge with each step. So avoiding discomfort and trying to sort of help normalize conversations through using our mission, our considerations for projects, which these are good fits with, is really important as you move forward. I have found so helpful using findings out there, such as the World Bank study from 2008, which talks about world biodiversity on Indigenous stewarded lands, helping to give the idea of different measures for projects and impacts feels helpful. And so that speaks to 80% of land-based biodiversity being on 22% of lands that are in Indigenous control. And I like to use that stat often. I also like to remind our organization that land return or reconnection to land is not just these transactions. Francis spoke to that a bit earlier on, but it's also in changing our signs, changing our events and programming. There's more that can be done to invite and to stop erasure narrative by land trusts, all in that is helpful in terms of reconnecting to place and land. And I'll maybe just say, I wrote down in my notes, patience and tenacity. Change in organization to start to get used to something like land return is small steps. It's not leaps. And sticking with it and continuing to have examples and talk about it and do more as a collective. And I think there's an exciting collective effort building in Maine is probably the most helpful pathway forward. So there were my reflections, Ellie. I hope that answered your questions.
Absolutely, Siona. Thank you. And thanks for expanding that sense too of what we're talking about when we talk about return. Here we're talking about return in terms of a parcel transferring to Mi'kmaq Nation, but it's as you've all acknowledged in different ways, so much more than that, and also the ways to kind of bring these ideas to an organization might begin with examples that don't look like transferring land, but might lead that way over time too, with patience and tenacity, as you point out. It's a good segue too. Brett, I wanted to ask you about the sticking with itness of this project. We've heard from multiple panelists that the project started as an idea, that Richard was really involved even 4 years ago or more, but that there were different bumps that happened all along the way, from 4 years ago to much more recently, and even failures, right, in that path. So I'd love to hear more about what you have to learn, or what we have to learn about sticking with a project, even when it faces these setbacks.
Thanks, Ellie. I'll try to be brief here too. I've heard from Richard too that this is like, it wasn't 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, this is one of the places he grew up, and so he knew this place. And he talks about when he was involved in some of the earlier reacquiring of land by the nation, that there was an opportunity to buy a bigger property back then. And it's always been sort of like an important place with an opportunity, but there hasn't been the sort of alignment of the pieces. So it goes way beyond, I think, the last few years, and probably goes way beyond Richard. I think it's his mom who brought him there to begin with. It wasn't like he showed up there on his own in Littleton. So I think it's really important, and I think it's important across all these projects that we work on and all the things Sayona talked about, and Shannon and Francis and Gabriella, is that this is not an idea that's just popped onto the scene recently. And I think that then to your question really drives that patience as a requirement of these type of projects. Um, I sometimes, if you're gonna like, if Sayona and I were gonna get tattoos with one of those words, she'd probably get patience and I might get tenacity. But that's, I think it also want both of them at some point. So I think that's one of the biggest lessons, is just like and it's patience, not just with the seller and with the opportunity, it's patience with what the tribal government needs and their councils. I mean, I think there's Sayona made this great point about like doing the work to get something ready, to sort of say, here's where the opportunity is. I mean, that was a big lesson. I feel like there's a safety that the conservation community might lean into sometimes, which is see if the 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 town or the tribe or the neighboring land trust, so see if they want this property, and then we'll go and see if we can make it happen. And I think there was a lot of trust building still to understand, like, well, what actually could the conservation community do? Like, could they act, if the tribe was interested in this, if the nation really felt this was an important property, could it actually happen? And that took some risk up front. Like Sayona said, First Light had to decide, and then ultimately chose to take on the role of an option holder, and being in the real estate transactionary world that it wasn't really born to be in, as far as an organization. So I think that was a big lesson. Being patient, being willing to take some risks that feel a little more that give space to the nation to really do their process, and be, and that's true of the commission too. Yeah, no, and I think in this case, it's also that constellation of people. Like in the funding one is one that I don't want to dwell on forever, because it can become something we always focus on, but it's so important here that there was a constellation of funding that made this work, and it wouldn't have worked elsewhere, and it might not work on another project, and it might work perfectly on another project, but we have to be willing, I think, to recognize these are collective actions, not like this is a return to the Mi'kmaq Nation for them, for their use of the property. And so therefore, if we're helping, having 5 or 6 different organizations being on the ticket is fine, on the, the sort of the work plan, it seems fine. It actually gets it done. In this case, again, there's this list of I even missed a few funders earlier. I think Maine Community Foundation actually was able to contribute too. Um, it was really put together in pieces. And really because I think we all shared the goal of like being able to do this and meet the expectation and the offer to the nation to help bring this piece of land back. So I think those are my lessons. I don't know, Shannon, you think I learned any other lessons?
Oh, I don't know about lessons, but I think something that's important to point out was, and I think, Gabriella had touched on, sometimes these land transactions can be really time sensitive. And with this particular, that's, the project before that we had looked at for maple sugaring, that kind of fell through because of timing and him not understanding our process and um, and maybe not fully even trusting the process. So, he wasn't willing to take a chance on us and ended up selling everybody else. But with this one too, I think what helped was the owner, there wasn't a for sale sign out there. We approached the owner and said, hey, we would love, the opportunity to acquire this piece. Um, and so, and she was really, didn't want anybody else to know about it. And I feel that was because, it is a nice piece, and there's a lot of interest, I think, in the community, the non-native community in her area that would have wanted and possibly, offered more money than we were able to do. So I think that's important to know too, that with this particular one is, we did have time on our side. She was, like I said, she didn't have a for sale sign out there. I really truly believe she did want the tribe. If anybody was going to have it, that the tribe did acquire that. And so, patience, yeah, was definitely, I think, the key word, the takeaway phrase on this one.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just, thinking about having time on your side, and just connecting back to, Sewell Foundation creating a process that could allow more time, and wondering where are the different places that partners can create space in what becomes such a like high strung kind of transaction oriented competitive sort of um, culture, I guess. Um, Thanks for sharing that. Shannon, I'm glad you mentioned time because we'd like to think about looking forward too. Um, what's the vision for this land as much as you'd like to share and how it connects to Mi'kmaq Farms, to the future plans of Mi'kmaq Nation? What do you see?
So we're really looking forward to using that piece in junction with our current piece for, individuals out living out that way to be able to have a place to go and recreate. Um, don't tell anybody. There's nobody else on the line, right? But it's an excellent hunting spot. So, it gives us a place to go hunt and, and do those things that we just haven't been able to do because we haven't had the space to do it in. And more and more land up here is getting posted and so we just don't have the land up here for us to go and do those type of things. So, that's I know one of my, priorities is going to be the hunting, using it. There's a beautiful stream. There is an ATV trail that comes pretty close to it. So, we want to be able to utilize that and have, members access it. Again, I mentioned, we have a very active Boys and Girls Club. Would love for them to, maybe put some lean-tos out there and being able to camp out and have that experience and fish and in an area, a lot of our population is in, off the side of an industrial park. So just give people a green space to go to and get away from traffic and all the noise of the city and yeah, have a place to go. So like I said, the maple sugaring, I'm really hoping next March that we're tapping. That'll go nicely, with the farm and what we are already doing out there and help us diversify with some products out there and what we're able to offer the community. And then the tree farm, down the road, we'll look at that ag land that's already tilled, and that's a great place to put some more trees if that's the route we go. So lots of opportunity. In the meantime, that piece is currently being leased to a local farmer, and we will, of course, um, continue to do that with him for a few years just to give him time before we do utilize that. We don't want to just, you know, go in and hang up, no trespassing signs. That's not how we like to be neighbors. So we'll give him a few years, and in the meantime, what we get from that lease will pay the taxes for us until we can get into trust. So it's really works out all the way around.
Thanks, Shannon. That's uh yeah, it's great to hear all of the things that open up with that possibility for land. Um, and I kind of want to turn to all of the panelists with this kind of similar question around, looking forward, what do you see? What do you imagine next in the realm of return in all its interpretations? And what is your organization working on? Um, and Francis, I can't help but hear Shannon describing all of these ways of connecting with the land and think back to what you said right at the beginning around Wabanaki Kiziapachiewik and the importance of the Commission's work in helping support healing and return of relationships. So um, maybe I'll ask for your thoughts first. What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about all the land return work, or even just land access work as well, um, I think I imagine a lot of the things that I remember doing growing up as a kid that maybe not all the kids in my community have access to now for different reasons. Um, growing up, we hear all these stories of like my grandmother going down to harvest sweetgrass with her family, or her dad. She always described her dad as walking into the woods with a burlap sack, and she never knew if he was coming back with it full of ash or with a deer to feed the family. Um, there's so many opportunities for learning and for connection. Um, and as the collaborative fund manager, I want to be able to fund a lot of that work. And really pass on a lot of those opportunities for healing and for connection and for learning. Um, you learn so much when you're out there with your community, just listening to stories. You learn the names of medicines and what some of those what medicines mean. Um, in our grant funding program now, we do talk about programs or folks applying to our fund if their work also has a language component or incorporates language in some way. And that's so important because our language also teaches you about the things that are on the land. And so one of my favorite words in Passamaquoddy is Wipunuksun, which if you directly translate it into English, it's translated to as feather shoe, but a feather shoe is a milkweed. And so Wipunuksun describes that process of when the milkweed pods open up and you see those seeds and you see the little feathers coming out, and then the pod itself, the that was holding all the seeds in, it looks like a shoe. It looks like a little moccasin with its little tip at the end. Um, and so I don't think a lot of our kids necessarily have access to all of that stuff, especially with all the we have tribal schools at Indian Township, Sabayag and Penobscot, and we learn so much from them. But it seems like as there also becomes more and more reporting requirements and so many testing requirements, I think a lot of the cultural stuff gets left behind. And so, with land return, it feels like there's a lot more opportunity for Wabanaki people to really be taking ownership of and creation of how we connect with the land. And that's really, really important for all of that cultural knowledge and connecting with our communities.
Yeah, thanks, Francis. And the parallel between being able to really lead how you connect with the land, and something like the return of medicine wheel and everything, Shannon, that you described around the right of ways and really being able to have to determine what that access looks like. That feels really resonant. Um, Brett, Siona, Gabriella, I'd love to hear from each of you. What's coming up for you when you think about looking forward, how you and your organization might support and what you see in the future of your work around returning land? Maybe whoever's feeling called.
Oh, I think what I'm really continuing to think about is from the perspective of funders, donors, and what Siona said around transactions. And we so often assume that our structures are agnostic or sort of objective, but they're not. They're built from our history. They carry forward values and assumptions and power dynamics. And so I guess what I'm sitting with is just an invitation to other funders and donors to really spend some time asking the question, what is this structure that I'm operating within? What values is it manifesting? What values is it communicating? And are those the values that I actually believe in and that I want to bring into relationship? So I think for us, that was the process we went through, basically, like, how are we handling this? Does this actually connect with the values that we have claimed that we want to live into? So just things that are, we often think there are legal barriers where there aren't. It's just a practice. There's so much in philanthropy that is just the way it's been done. And we assume that that's the correct way because it's been done and that's what we were taught. And then we tell the next person to do it that way. But we need to question that because there is a lot of white supremacy. There is a lot of disconnection built into our structures and into our processes that are continuing and perpetuating harm, particularly when it comes to relations with our Indigenous communities and partners.
Thank you, Gabriella.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriella. I think I'm thinking about what our organization has begun conversations about is thinking about the word conservation and what it means, what we mean when we talk about it. And I think what I've been trying to think about in our organization is along the lines of what Gabriella was just speaking about. We get accustomed to using metrics of certain types, acres, shore frontage feet, impacts. And what are the other metrics we could be thinking about that get more at some of the values that people like Shannon and Francis are able to speak to so eloquently? How else can we be looking at projects that are a lot more value driven rather than transactional to start to train ourselves? Maybe we need to start in addition to transactions, but how can we start that shift? And I think it could be great for conservation in general to be thinking along those lines and changing our ways. So that's what I think about.
And Ellie, you could answer part of this question because Ellie and I are, we're in the same core staff, so she'll if you want to add anything, Ellie, you can take off your monitor hat for a second. But I just really think what you started with, Francis, this sense of, well, land return is a piece of healing, or there's this healing space. I feel like that's a, a value, a role, a goal that First Light leans into, and we'll think more and more about, and also how to bring more people into that is a big part of it too. I think one of the technical components of this project, the fact that many people and their organizations were able to put in something to make it work, to me would be a great model to see forward and see more of. And I want to figure out how we can support that as much as we can. So whether it's through similar structures or through the structure of the tributary grouping. I mean, there's figuring out the best way to make more and more of the First Light community feel active in that work, in that healing work and the return work. Feels like a big goal for us, for our organization.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Thank you, Sayona. Uh, yeah, I can only echo kind of what I've heard, and I think even one thing that's exciting to me is imagining that collaboration also growing, so that people that are called to the promise of return and the ability for healing through that know they have a place in supporting that, even if it's coming from a lot of different vantage points and perspectives and positions. Um, I want to take a moment and maybe pass you all some of these questions that have come in from our audience. We have spent a bit of time talking about how conservation culture can be very focused on metrics, things like acreage and value. And so we do have a question about that around Medicine Wheel. So I'd like to invite a response to that, but also maybe you can expand it and give us a sense of, for the Commission's kind of affirmed tributary projects, uh, what sort of acreage or what sort of approach to thinking about acreage and fundraising will be needed for that to happen? Maybe kind of growing from this particular example.
I can grab this technical question first, and then yeah, maybe others might want to jump on. So the total acquisition cost, I think, was like 235,000, Lynette, and so it was about 100 and plus, so 103 or so acres, so 2,000 and some change. But there also was the right of way that was part of the transaction. That was a separate document, a separate legal instrument. So there were components of it that it's not quite a straight acreage value cost. And then you heard Chad mention the piece about the tax implication, and right now the property is still being taxed, and she can speak to whether when it goes into trust how that would continue or not continue. Um, but then the bigger question that Ellie raised, the tributary, I mean, that's generally speaking, so there's 51 million plus or minus dollars of acquisition costs and steward and a mix of stewardship costs and some organizational costs or project cost in that whole set, and that's somewhere around 50,000 plus acres. Um, but it also fits in this, like, there are big acreage projects and there are teeny tiny projects. To Siona's point about values, like there's no hierarchical valuation that a 2 acre Penobscot project is any different or bit better than a 5,000 acre Passamaquoddy project. It really is based on what, if they matter to the commission, has helped affirm their sort of import. But the metrics are, yeah, 50 plus million, 50,000 acres. And then there's also just, I mean, there are other really wonderful, important projects happening that are land returns within Wabanaki territory that we all live in. I mean, there are organizations considering donating land they already own. There's organizations working with Wabanaki NGOs. There's tribal governments on their own acquiring land. There's all kinds of things happening, but that's the place where we're closest to and the most relevant to your question.
Thanks for that, Brett. I think a couple of questions coming in around just relationships with the town of Littleton. And Shannon, to the extent you're interested, I would love to hear your thoughts on that and maybe also the trust hopes for the land.
Yep. So yeah, currently, this is it's called a fee property. So there's, taxes were currently being paid and will continue to be paid on it until the property goes through the trust process. That can take 2 to 5 years. Sometimes it all depends. We don't suspect that this piece is going to be a difficult one where it currently abuts, pre-existing trust land. Those pieces tend to go a little quicker. And our process through our land settlement is a little bit less stressful than some of my Wabanaki colleagues. So we're hoping, the sooner we can get into trust and, well, then we don't no longer pay the town those taxes. It's 103 acres. Most of was in tree growth. The town is not going to lose a lot of money on that. I think it's like literally $1,600 probably. So it's, they're not going to have a big cut. It's not a huge piece of property. Um, and then, like I said, we will go through the trust property. I know it's one of the questions asked about the relationship with the town. And so, as I mentioned before, the landowner did not want um, this to go public until after the closing of the property. For whatever her reasons or her reasons, and we respected that. So we have not, at this point, really communicated with the town at all.
Thanks, Shannon. One thing that's coming to mind for me is I think in the First Light community, there's a lot of kind of this community has learned a lot about what Wabanaki stewardship of land looks like and can see it so clearly as move on the path towards healing or something that has this broader benefit. I think that comes out in different places. I'm thinking of, for example, the importance of the report that the Wabanaki Alliance commissioned, I guess, on economic impacts of sovereignty. Like I see different avenues for kind of public education, for lack of a better term, around why a municipality might also celebrate land return rather than seeing it as a loss to their tax base. And I'm really interested, not something to answer today or anytime soon, but just ways for our community to support that kind of broader shift in thinking
No,
in
it doesn't
terms of
always have to
right
be,
now.
a negative thing for sure. Like, a loss
Absolutely.
in taxes. It's, with this particular project, probably not, but, we'll have other projects or we have other land bases where, we're looking to do economic development on that. So in those areas or, those towns, they may not see the taxes, but once we open up, let's say, a store or a restaurant or something, gas station in their town, that's going to bring so much more money into their town than, to really offset the little bit of taxes that we would have paid anyway. So it definitely can be a positive thing for both. It doesn't have to be, a negative. And it would be great, yeah, to have it looked at more as a celebration than like a loss.
And I think there's
Absolutely.
examples like that everywhere too, Ellie and Shannon too. I think about across the street, the Holton Band of Mouse seats kind of center of community and government isn't far away. And I remember Isaac, who joined us last year on this call, once telling me, there's these like structures they built in the middle of farm fields to retain sediment and help kind of protect agricultural runoff from going into the river. And you know, it's the kind of thing that everyone who's connected to that river is seeing the benefits of, and it's just part of that land use. But when it went from being not the a non-indigenous farmer to the band's ownership, like that's a thing that happened, and it's to everyone's benefit.
Absolutely. Thanks for that example too, Brett. Um, Shannon, another one here for you around what types of return would be interesting for Mi'kmaq Nation. Access, exclusive access, full acquisition. What do you think about?
So, Richard and I talk with our council when we're looking to do any type of land return projects, and and that's based on information that we've gathered from the community at community meetings, and so we want to always make sure that we are doing what the community, wants. So I would say that we would really, be open to just about, any type of return. Um, you know, but we're looking, we don't want restrictions, we don't want right of ways and things like that. we do know that those type of implications, if it's something that we want to put in trust, um, prohibits that process anyway. So we want to be sure, if it's a property that we want to put into trust, it has to have a nice, clean, title and without land use restrictions or anything on it. So, so we look at things like that, but I think really we would be open for the most part. Yeah, it's we would probably like to, for the most part, own everything outright. But I think, we're definitely open to conversations and, we like to be innovative and think outside the box. And if there's other ways of doing that and having land return, I think we would definitely be open to it.
Yeah, really centering the conversation and the relationships. Certainly not every land return will look exactly the same. Um, I think it's important that this land returned without cost and without restriction. And I know that's an aspiration many conservation organizations that are part of First Light holds, and funders, as we've heard, like Sewell Foundation, are some funders, I guess I should say, are also supporting. And so we have just a couple minutes left, but Gabriella, I'd love to ask you this last question. If you have any kind of top of your mind examples of those ways that we see our funding practices as reflecting values that don't align with all we've come to learn and believe now.
I think the tendency to do restricted funding or project funding that is very specific, like that wouldn't have worked in this case, right? Um, Funding that limits overhead or administrative costs, not helpful. Again, I think when you ask yourself, am I committed to the purpose of this project or the work that this partner is doing? And if the answer is yes, then you want to remove all the barriers possible. And oftentimes in philanthropy, we create barriers because of the illusion of some sort of quantifiable impact that is otherwise not possible. But we've got to question that, and we've got to ask ourselves, what are the other impacts that may be measurable or may be measurable in different ways? Certainly relationship, community building, creating connection, healing, all of these things are very important, tangible things that may not be quantifiable, but they're certainly necessary for all of us to accomplish what I think all of our organizations want. So I would just say, really question any restriction, any barrier that you're putting into your funding, and ask yourself, is it serving the purpose of this interaction, this relationship, and is it serving the values that we believe in your foundation or in yourself?
Thank you, Gabriella. Becky, I see your question, and I encourage you to carry it forward into other spaces. I'd like to wrap up with enormous gratitude, Shannon, Francis, Gabriella, Siona, Brett, for spending this time this afternoon to share this story in all its intricacies and also what you've learned from it. Shannon, something you said earlier was the collaboration is a beautiful thing to see, and I feel that even this afternoon. So I'd like to open it up to any of you who'd like to say one last comment before we sign off this afternoon and head out into the foggy evening.
I would just like to say thank you to all the funders out there that support this kind of work.
I would just share that we hope to have more of these. So, we had one last year. We're hoping the pace will pick up, but it's all based on, how people feel about them and if they want to share the lessons. But keep trying to have more of these as more lambs returned. And yeah, thank you for joining us today. It was really fun to be on the Zoom stream with you five.
the rest of the audience who we know are out there. And I'm sorry we can't see your faces. Thanks for being part of it this afternoon. Take care, everybody.